Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Rumney. I'm the Director of Research for the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council. Today, we're going to be talking about harvest and harvest concerns. We're going to have a great day today. We have a huge amount of content to go through in the next hour or so. We have a great grower panel here that we can have some interaction with, and a group of experts that have volunteered their time. We have videos of some expert information on harvest concerns. Here we see the outline of what we're going to cover today. We have an introduction, talking about harvest safety, some of the concerns about planning for your harvest at planting time, what to do 2 weeks and 2 days before your harvest, talk about combine setup, the special concerns for harvesting organics, and what happens if you need to make an insurance claim and you need to get that official grade. We're going to be going through the grading process, and the impact of MRLs on your crop and the market in general.
I'd like to welcome everyone to PulsED, put on by the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council in cooperation with the Risk Management Agency. We have a really special session for you today. Actually, we're going to talk about harvest concerns. And the first thing we're going to talk about really is harvest safety. And I can remember my times in the field where actually I started a combine fire once upon a time in about 1988. Pretty dangerous time for me, actually. And we're going to talk about harvest safety and how important it is to be safe at harvest time. The next thing we're going to talk about really is harvest quality and really harvesting a good quality crop, because it's a lot easier to sell a crop that's of high quality than of low quality. So we're going to give you some tips on how to harvest great pulses and keep the quality up so we can service our great quality markets here domestically as well as overseas. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this event, and I especially want to thank the Risk Management Agency for this grant to help us educate our growers and our industry members on harvest concerns.
Very well said, Tim. Great job. So what was the outcome of that combine fire?
We lost the combine.
Oh, that's not... Well, hopefully with this information today that we can help prevent this. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into our harvest safety video. This is about a 7-minute video, covers a lot of great information.
I'm Lester Irwin. I'm the fire chief for Whitman County Fire District 12. I've been here since 1978, and I've been chief for about 15 years, I believe. Our biggest concern is protecting your family when you start. You know, working around your farm, getting your equipment ready and stuff. Make sure you know where your kids are. You've got them inside, so you're not having a problem about running somebody over. Same thing with your crews. You know, when they're out there moving equipment back and forth, know where each other is and stuff, so they, you know, are in the right spots to not get run over by equipment. And then the next thing is when you start to hit the road, you want to make sure, you know, that you got your equipment up and, you know, lights running right, you got your flagging, because a lot of our roads are pretty narrow roads, and so you want to have flaggers in front and back like the state requires, and that you're not doing it after dusk. We had a pretty serious accident 2 years ago out in Palouse area where a farmer was moving equipment, and a person came around the corner and did not see the wing of that one applicator and just took that thing head on. So, you know, when you're moving equipment, be safe. I mean, because we get a lot of passerbyers in this area that don't know about the farming equipment that a lot of us do that go up and down the road every day. And so have your flaggers, try to do it when it's safe, daylight, when it's really bright and stuff. The next thing is, if we get you out into the fields, you're working out there, you have some kind of a fire in your field, you need to get a hold of 911, either via a radio as far as getting a hold of someone that can get on the phone, call 911, get our dispatch, getting us paged. They're going to ask you some questions. You need to stay on the phone with these people when they're asking you questions, because they're trying to get us there as quick as we can by getting the best directions to the scene. The one thing that we do not like them doing is trying to put a fire out with a combine. And that just causes more problems. You're going to have a combine fire then and stuff. But most of our farmers are really good. They get a disc out there on a tractor and they will get it disc. Don't try to put the fire out with the disc. Put a fire line around the fire. Let the fire burn to that disc line and it dies down. Then we can come in there with the fire trucks and mop it up and clean it up. If you're in a combine and you realize that you've got a fire, the best thing to do is find the most flattest area that you can park it in and leave it, get away from the fire. If you can find a plowed field, pea field, garbage field, any of those, get them into those fields, because in a standing grain field, the fire can go either direction. But if you get them into those type of fields, they don't burn as fast and stuff, so your equipment will be safe in that area. If you're going to open up a field, either discing it or plowing around it, you want to make sure you know where your power lines are. And a lot of times they'll have ground wires to them and stuff, stabilizers. So if you're coming around a field and you're laying it out wrong, backwards or something, your header hits, or your downspout for your combine hooks on it, you know that you've hooked a power line. You want to stay in that combine because you don't know where that power line is. If it's laying on the combine, you do not want to get out of there. You're safe inside that combine because you're grounded right there. Stay in the combine, get a hold of someone, get power company out there and get us coming, because we will get a hold of the power company ourselves, make sure they can come get it, lift the line off, shut the power off, however we have to do, and we'll get you out of there. Just stay in that combine if it's on your machinery. Okay, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the fire extinguishers that you guys should have in your vehicles. The first one is a dry chemical. It's an ABC one, and it explains that right here on the front of the bottle, A, B, and C. And you got your woods and papers, then you got your petroleum, stuff like that, and then electrical. And this will take care of any one of those fires that you have. The main thing is you don't want to use water on gasoline, because as soon as you hit it with water, you spread that fire out big time. So you use this for those type of fires, get those type of fires out. If you got a grain fire underneath the truck or in the header of your combine or the back end of the combine or something like that, that's when a pressurized water can comes in handy, and that's this one. And you take it out, pull your pins, and just fan it real good, and this thing will put out a lot of fire. And you want to make sure they're serviced. That's what these tags are. This tag is set up, so this was done in 2016, and we have until October, and then they will come in and recheck them out, and then they'll punch 17, and they'll be ready to go for another year. The chemical sets in these, and it gets hard, and so if you don't have them checked yearly, that powder will not come out of these sometimes. So you want to make sure that they're done and checked every year. So you got a tag on it, you got your tag on it that's holding your pin in it so it won't accidentally discharge. This pin, you just pop it out when you're ready to go, and you're ready to go on that one. This one, because it's pressurized, is what I said, it's a pressurized water can. So it's got the gauge here that tells you that it's in the green, that it's ready to go. It's got the right amount of air pressure in it, and it's got the right amount of water in it. And like I say, if you use it right, it'll put out a lot of fire. All right, for the Pulse farmers, the big thing is to make sure that you use your air compressors to blow off those engines and the fenders and stuff on your combines, because if you don't, that dust sits on there and that is going to cause a fire. And if you have the dust there, it'll drip and you can spread fire for miles if you're not realizing it. Once it starts, then you'll smell the smoke. But keep those things cleared. And if you're doing garbs, you want to pay attention to that static electricity on your combines. So use your chains, use your compressors, keep the dust off them, and with that, hopefully we'll keep the combines from burning up. The big thing for my patrons that I tell my patrons, during harvest is to watch the weather. Wind is your biggest problem. And if it's going to be a windy day, I know it's tough to shut down a vehicle and stay out of your field, but there's certain days when we have a big high red flag warning going with, low humidity, high winds. We need you to shut your combines down. That is our biggest concern at times. Okay, I'd like to thank the Pea and Lettle Council for inviting me to do this video. We want to get this out to the people safety-wise, to protect their families, their hired hands. And so we're trying to make this so people realize what they need to do to keep things safe on the farm. For all you volunteer firefighters out there, we thank you very much for what you do.
That is such a true statement to thank your volunteer firemen. They do an amazing job, both in controlling fire and dealing with vehicle accidents. It's a big asset to most rural communities, and we really appreciate that. So just some basics for harvest safety: getting organized before harvest, making sure that you have all your tools and equipment ready, thinking about your PPE or your personal protection equipment. Hearing protection is key. A lot of the equipment now is a lot more quiet than it was 20, 30 years ago, but still PPE is really important. Review the safety and maintenance schedules for your equipment. And as you start out the day, just do a basic walk around your equipment. A visual inspection can go a long way in making sure that both your equipment is operating properly, but also safe. And look at your cab, both in your pickup and in your combine. Is it a recipe for disaster? Imagine rolling a pickup, having a bottle jack inside of that cab, and what that could do to your forehead if it came in contact. So just think about those things. So, and also make sure you have a working first aid kit in your combine and in your vehicles. So as we were thinking about this module, we were thinking about where should we start the topics? Where should we start the discussion when we're thinking about assuring that we have a good quality harvest? So we decided that the best place to start harvest is at seeding.
Hello, I am Ken Fuchs, ProGene Plant Research, and I'm the Vice Chair of the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Research Committee.
I'm Kurt Brownwert. I'm the Managing Owner of ProGene Plant Research. We've been in breeding for dry peas for the last 20 plus years.
Today we hope to briefly discuss what the effect of quality seed has on your end use or your harvest quality. Your consistent harvest quality begins in your planter box. You reap what you sow. You want to start out with a variety which you are sure is going to produce a high yield on your farm without losing the identity of it by having a rotational issue. You need to be aware of what crop has been grown there, especially pulses. They volunteer back for many years, and a off type such as a Pardina in a Richley or a Brewer is going to change your quality and change what the processor is hoping to buy for our end-use markets.
Yeah, and the lentils out of the three, out of dry peas and lentils and chickpeas, they will volunteer for the longest number of years, 4 or 5, sound about right, Ken? And your peas still will volunteer. We've seen them show up as much as 3 years, certainly more if it's just a 2-year rotation. Not only is what you pick for what you're going to plant affect rotational factors of volunteers, but it also could be a factor in how you set up your placement of your crops, or how many different pulses you want to grow, or how many different classes within a pulse you want to grow, depending on your combine situation. If how you position your crop or how you select which pulse or which class to grow can minimize the need for combine clean down, you're better off both time-wise and for the quality that you can deliver into that processor. And a good example of that is right here as you look at the lentils in the bowls here. You can see a pretty quite different. This is a large red. Most of them grown are small reds. But this is a beluga black lentil. This is a pardina brown lentil and a richly lentil. And if you're going to have both a richly and a small red, let's say, on your farm, are you positioned to where you can combine them with different combines so that you don't have to go directly from one to other with a combine clean down? It's also a factor if you're going from wheat to lentils, because it's hard to clean wheat out of lentils. And then you need that combine clean down. A couple things to think about that's worth thinking about before you plant about harvest. Which market are you really wanting to go to? Both of them are important markets and valuable markets. One is the commodity market, where they're buying a green pea or a yellow pea or a richly lentil or a garb. But the other market is a targeted end-use market. And the end users are often asking for particular variety or varieties to make what they want. And therefore, your buyer or your processor wants to have that variety in order to sell to them. Where does your seed come from, and does it fit one of those markets that you choose to be in? Obviously, there are pros and cons to each seed source. The advantages of a bin-run seed program is it's lower cost, and it is. And you have the product right there on your farm. Now, an advantage of a managed seed program is that you have an assurance to the end buyer of what variety it is that they are buying. And the market in general, there's some of the market that wants that, and it's inching more and more that direction, even in ingredient market, where they're finding that some varieties work better in an extruding process, for example, than others. The other advantages can include some that Ken often touches on in the diseases.
Yeah, the diseases that can be carried by the seed are very important, and you need to make sure that you're working with a product that you're not introducing one of those diseases into your soil if you don't already have it, like seed-borne.
Pea seed-borne mosaic virus.
Ascochyta and bacterial blight. So a quality seed program will help you minimize that risk.
Okay, the real key to this is that you're thinking before planting, how will my seed source affect the market that I am wanting to go to? And just encourage you to think about that.
So there were some really good points in that video, and one of them is to think about this open market kind of general class versus the contracted. And as we see the pulse industry evolve into a higher end ingredient market, that contracted market, the relationship that you have with your merchant, your processor, and our consumer becomes more and more important in that contracted market. And really, that's the future of our industry. And also the importance of seed testing. One of the things that Ken mentioned was Ascochyta. And this can be a tragedy of the commons. If you as a producer are running bin-run seed and that seed is contaminated with Ascochyta, you're affecting your farm and the potential yield on your farm. But because the pathogen Ascochyta is windblown and it can spread for hundreds of miles, you're also affecting all your neighbors. So your decisions not only affect you, but everybody around you. So as we get ready for the actual harvest, we need to realize some of the things that are unique to pulses. As contrasted to, say, wheat and barley and other cereal grains, pulses are indeterminate, meaning that they just continue to grow throughout the season. You'll have the lower pods on the plant that are mature and ready to harvest, but the upper portion of the plant might be green. So in order to handle that indeterminate situation, producers have two options. They can swath to kill the crop, or they can use desiccation. So we're going to hear from Dr. Drew Lyons, the endowed chair at WSU, about desiccation of pulse crops.
All right, thanks, Jeff. I was asked to talk a little bit about desiccation and pulse crops, and so this is a brief presentation. I think this might be a good year for this. We're getting some pulses in late. We have lots of moisture in the soil, and if we catch some rains in the season, we're going to have portions of the field probably that are going to stay green very late. And so I think desiccation, at least in the Pacific Northwest, is an issue that a lot of you will have. So the keys to success with desiccation is to plan ahead. So perhaps this is a good year to already be thinking about what you're going to be doing as far as desiccating your crop, because I believe a lot of people will be dealing with this. You want to, of course, follow the label directions. There are several products we'll talk about here, and you'll want to read the label very closely to make sure you use the right surfactants, apply at the right rate and the right time. Make applications at the right time to maximize harvest success. So timing is really critical here when you do things. As Jeff mentioned, pulses are indeterminate. You want to maximize your yield and not cause too much problem with immature grain. So here's a slide with the different products that are labeled as harvest aids, either as desiccation or for weed control. Basically, we have 4 active ingredients under several different trade names. We have carfentrazone, glyphosate, paraquat, and saflufenicil. You'll notice for rapid desiccation, 3 of the 4 can be considered desiccants because they cause a rapid dry down of the plant. Glyphosate is not really a desiccant. It doesn't cause rapid dry down. It basically kills like it normally does. It takes anywhere from 10, 14 days, depending on weather conditions. It's probably your better choice if you have a lot of weed problems out there, rather than just trying to dry down the crop. But be aware that if you're using glyphosate, it's going to take a while, so you need to do it early enough to get the job done. If you look at the crops registered, they're all registered in chickpeas, in dry peas, all but Roundup. They're all labeled, but Roundup is not to be used for dry pea grown for feed. They probably don't have the residue work done for feed, so it's not labeled for that use. And then lentils are labeled, or everything but carfentrazone or AIM is labeled in lentils, and Sharpen is not to be applied to green lentil varieties. So we have a number of products to look at. They have pluses and minuses. Glyphosate, like I said, is probably the best if you have a lot of weeds you want to get dried down as well as with the crop. And the others are good desiccants if weeds aren't as big an issue for you. All right, so the thing you need to watch real carefully is the pre-harvest interval. As you can see, carfentrazone or AIM has no pre-harvest interval for chickpea or dry pea. It's not labeled in lentils. Glyphosate used to have a 14-day pre-harvest interval. They have that down to 7 days now. Now, I don't think glyphosate will have done the job you want it to do in 7 days, but it does have a pre-harvest interval of 7 days. Paraquat is 7 days, and then Sharpen is either 2 or 3 days, depending on the species you're working with. So be sure you pay attention to these. These can get you in trouble if you don't watch them. Desiccation and pulse crops. Crop must be at the right stage before applying desiccant. One thing you read over and over is that desiccants do not advance seed maturity. So if your grain is not mature when you spray, it's not going to speed that up and make it become mature. It's basically just going to dry down the crop. Photosynthesis going to stop moving, and your bean is going to be, or pea is going to be at the same stage as when you applied the product. As Jeff was mentioning, there's generally 3 layers of pods on these indeterminate plants. Your lower and middle part of the plant is generally where most of your yield is. You don't have as much grain there at the tips, but those are the ones that are going to cause you some problems because they're going to be the immature ones and the green ones. But you want to make sure that your bottom layers are mature and as much of the outer layer as possible. Crop maturity is going to vary across a field in response to water. So those parts of the field where there's still water that the plant can use, they're going to stay green longer. And so as you think about when you want to apply your product, you need to think about the entire field and not just the field in general. So you may want to let a little bit go. Again, as I did some research on this with people, talked to some people up north in Canada. They say when you think it's time to spray, wait another 2 days or 3 days. So usually you're better off to let that mature just a little bit more than you think you should. Because all except for Roundup, because these are contact herbicides, so they basically kill the tissue with which they come in contact. Coverage is very important, and you need to maintain your gallons per acre. These are minimums. I would argue that you probably would like to go higher if you want to do a really good job of getting desiccation. 10 gallons for carfentrazone, 20 for paraquat, 10 for saflufenicel when applied by ground. They're all 5 gallons per acre by air. Again, I think the more gallons you use, the better coverage you'll get and the better desiccation you'll get. So I know it's a pain to use that many gallons, but if you want to do a good job, use as many gallons as you can. And then the other thing you want to think about is that you want to set your boom height for the intended target. So we're kind of all used to applying pesticides in shorter crops on weeds that are just a few inches tall, and you have your boom down to keep the pattern so that it hits at that target. When you're spraying garbs and they're up, or whatever the peas or lentils, you want to have your target the top of that canopy, and so you're probably going to have to move your boom height up higher than you used to, and therefore you're going to also have higher risk of drift. So be careful on the days that you spray. So that's really all I have. All these products have different surfactant requirements. You'll want to look at the label to see what those surfactant requirements are, different rates that you want to use. But those are the products that you're limited to, and basically you really need to be planning ahead and picking your date for desiccation as carefully as possible.
That was a great presentation, Dr. Lyon. I really appreciate you taking time to come here. It's nice to have experts in the room. So one of the things to think about as you're preparing for harvest is the proper moisture content of your crop. Now, for peas, lentils, and chickpeas, the higher the moisture content, the better, in that you'll get less seed damage as you're combining. But indeed, if it's too high, then you have the potential for having mold or heating in your bin, and we'll see more about that as we go through the grain inspection process. So one of the greatest tools that you can have as a pulse grower is a good field moisture meter. Go out on a periodic basis as you're coming up towards harvest, do a little bit of hand threshing and throw that commodity in the cup of your moisture meter. So I would suggest a couple weeks before harvest that you run over to your grain elevator or perhaps to an official grain inspection agency and take your moisture meter there, and they can use their high-end moisture meter equipment and recalibrate your field moisture meter. And that way you know that you're getting pretty close information on that handheld meter as what the official agency will be getting. So the other option that we have for dealing with a pulse crop and the fact that it's indeterminate is using swathing. And it all depends on your situation, whether you have access to a swather and whether it fits into your system. And we'll learn more about this in the information that we have on organics. But basically, we want to swath with a wide, shallow swath. You know, that swather is going to be just inches off the ground in order to capture all those pods. So make sure that it's set up properly, that it's maintained well, and the operator is well trained on how to use that swather. And using a flex head or gauge wheels on that swather will make a big difference. So one of the things that we should point out on some specific issues as the crops is, for example, with lentils. In lentils, color is critical in determining the quality of the crop. And as we'll learn, that the grain inspection process for peas, lentils, and chickpeas has a color component to the grade, but the color component of the grade is just a starting point to examine the quality of that particular lentil crop. Lentils are sold as a whole grain. In the market, the buyers are going to be looking at the whole grain of lentils and examining the color, and they have very high color standards for lentils. For example, red lentils in Europe. that actually exceed what our USDA grading standards are. In regards to pea harvest, there's some specific issues that we need to deal with in harvesting peas, and there's a damage that is seen quite often called bleach. Bleach in green peas is associated with the loss of chlorophyll in that green kernel. So instead of being nice, bright green, it actually has a yellow spot on it. And this is caused by perhaps excess moisture, lodging, or sunlight at maturity. Bleach in yellow peas is completely different. It's due to immature seeds. So instead of being a nice, bright yellow, there's a green spot on it. And that's analogous to a tomato. A tomato is supposed to be nice, bright, and red, but if it's picked immature, it has a green spot on it, just like yellow peas. And we need to be very aware of mechanical damage on our pea harvest, slow down that combine, and check that grain as it's coming into the bin on a regular basis. As you pull into the field, at least every 10 or 15 minutes to make sure that combine is set properly. And for chickpeas, think about it, transitioning from a wheat field into a chickpea field, and the size of the kernel and the texture of that kernel. That chickpea kernel is completely different than what a wheat kernel is. And those chickpeas are very susceptible to splitting, so slow down and open it up. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But also green damage as a part of your grade. Green damage is strictly not tolerated in chickpeas. There's a very, very low tolerance for green damage. So if you do have a field that has some green patches in it, you should harvest those areas and store those areas separately to not mix that grain in with the good grain.
Hello, my name is Ken Fuchs. I am the Dry Pea Product Manager of ProGene Plant Research and the Vice Chair of the Pea and Lentil Research Committee.
I'm Kurt Brownward. I'm the managing owner of ProGene Plant Research, and what we're going to do today is play off of both of our experience. I've been in the business for 43 years and working on setting combines to minimize damage, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we've learned.
One of the most important factors when we start setting a combine is the driver that's sitting in the seat. You're going to determine, is it time to be cutting that crop? Is the humidity right? Is it ripe? How fast it's going? And the adjustment to make sure that the product that drops into that tank is what you would want to purchase or your buyer is going to want to buy.
That combine operator should be as versed in how to set this as the farmer is, or more so. Because over the years, I've come up with several 4 or 5 factors that are really critical, and number one is having an operator that knows how to operate that combine, not just drive it. Okay, one of the first factors Ken mentioned about was when it's time to start harvest. What are the factors involved in that, Ken?
Well, you want to know, is that crop ripe? Will it thrash out efficiently? Is it ready to go? If you cut it too wet, you're going to have a storage issue. If you wait till it gets over dry, extra dry seed is very hard to maintain a quality without cracking, splitting, and hurting the seed coat.
One of the other factors that we always talk about is what is the thrashing action of that combine. The rotary action is more gentle on a crop than a conventional. A conventional has the cylinder coming down and striking that seed, whereas on a rotary type, the seed starts spinning before you get to the rotor, and the rotor has to catch up to it, causing a rubbing action versus the striking action. Therefore, a rotor will typically give you less damage if set right. Now, that might change the capacity, but you're doing a balancing act between capacity. What are some of the factors there, Ken, when you talk about how many acres versus what you want to put in the tank?
Well, what I'd like to tell growers is drive so you get the best quality seed You can overdrive your header, you can shear off, strip, whatever you want to call it. Every crop is different. Is it a heavy crop? Is it light? Is it thin? There's so many different factors, but most of them are don't drive so fast that you're not putting the product in the tank.
You want to look at it soon after you're going, maybe an acre later. Obviously, the best is if you have two of you there at the starting time. One person can get a sample, look in the tank while the other one's operating, and the most efficient way to check whether I'm getting cracked seed coat, because that's a little harder to see if you just look in the bin. Have that second person get a sample and get it properly. Don't climb in there while the augers are running, okay? But get that sample properly and then get off the combine, let the guy keep thrashing for a bit. You count out 200 seeds, put it in a cup, add water above it for 3 minutes. And after 3 minutes, anything that has a cracked seed coat, that seed coat's gonna peel back and you can count them real easily. That's the way to check it. If you're running 3% cracked seed coat or even 4, you're okay. Obviously we'd like 1, but if you're starting to hit 5, 6, 7% cracked seed coat, you got some adjustments to do.
As we pull into the field, 3 major factors we need to be aware of. First of all, you need to start out with a basic setting of your combine. If you have a cylinder or a rotor, there is book settings you can start with, but you need to adjust that close to get started. Adjust your fan speed close to what you should be or where you think it should be to get started. And then once you get into that field, you put the header on the ground and you start going forward and figure out your ground speed, go a short distance, and then get back, stop, and go out and check. Look in the bulk tank first, check behind, see how much is going out the back, how much damage you're doing, and then start making fine-tune adjustments that technically should be done a couple of times a day depending on what part of the field due to maturity and humidity, etc.
Some of the adjustments you might be looking at is, okay, I'm putting too much seed through the return, so I got to open the sieve a little bit or cut down the air a little bit, or I'm getting too much cracked seed coat, or 1.5% broken, or skinned lentils, and therefore you can slow down your cylinder. But those are all factors after you check your bulk tank.
And each crop, be it chickpeas, peas, lentils, beans, every crop is going to be just a little bit different on how you want to set.
If there is a time you would need to clean a combine, which sometimes is important if you're going from a green pea to a yellow or a richly typed lentil to a red, or vice versa. And the first thing to realize is these new modern combines that are really big are not cleanable. You can't do it. Now, you can make it better, but you can't completely do it. You know, a rotor combine is easier to clean than a conventional, and it's mainly because you got better access, okay? You can't get into the side of the conventional combines. There's too many belts, too many everything else there. But in this one, you can get in and get some air to blow everything away. You can go in the front of the rotor and scoop out stuff that's in a well right in the front of the rotor. You can get here with air and clean in this place. The augers are really, really difficult to clean. I know most of you won't have this, but if you were to have access to a water truck with a pump on it, if you were to clean it down, just loosen stuff up with air first. This is what we do on all of our seed crops. If you loosen it up with air first and then flush water through it, you'll get 95 to 96% of what's in there. And that after that water flush, you want it to dry out on your bearings, other factors like that, okay? Even though they're not cleanable, you can get some of it cleaned out. But a lot of it on the newer, bigger ones is you just don't have access to the combine. So do that pre-planning. That helps to minimize any case where you might need to have that combine cleaned from one class to another.
The bottom line is we want to get this combine adjusted as we're cutting these pulses to provide the highest quality pulses to the world that they have come to expect
That is so true. I mean, we've gone through the whole planning process and the entire season, and just a few minutes, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, getting that combine set up perfectly is truly, truly important. So I know it's tough, but change your mindset just a little bit. Consider harvest quality versus the number of acres you harvest on any afternoon. So now we're going to jump into some specific issues associated with harvesting organic pulses.
Consumer demand for organic crops has created a popular and burgeoning niche in the pulse crop industry. Pulse crops are already considered sustainable for their low water use and ability to fix nitrogen in the soil, but growers like Daryl Lasilla in Great Falls, Montana, have opted to grow the organic way.
The man hours are greater on the organic end. Has a market for it. People are asking for them, so I'll grow it for them. My name's Daryl Lasilla. I farm east of Great Falls. Everything is, I try to keep it 100% organic. I lease it from the family and try to keep them a good return for their investment they have here. One of the rotations that I found that worked the best is using a lentil in amongst the small grain crops.
Now, although many production decisions may differ from conventional growers, you might be surprised to find that at harvest time, everyone has the same worries.
Being organic, we do have a excess of weeds compared to the conventional type. Harvest actually starts at planting season, getting the right planting conditions. The roller is the key to having a happy day at come harvest, to get the ground level or get the rocks out of the way, because the lentils are short. Roll it either before it's emerged or after. You got to watch it that you're not spreading disease when you're rolling it. When it's up very high, you could lose some crop that way, or disease could take it all. Got to watch the bugs after that.
Organic growers have the same concerns of reducing damage at harvest, but may have to rely on different methods than conventional producers.
Preventing damage starts by watching the moisture on them, cutting them at the right moisture. I go by, I believe it's the top ones are ripening first, and then when the bottom ones are still almost in a green stage, it's time to swath them, and then by the time they dry down, everything will be good. We go and swath it the day or two before and let the weeds dry down. I usually shoot for a 14 to 16 max moisture when I'm starting to harvest. You go like you're haying it. It puts it in a windrow. We use a 30-foot head, and I can double swath it, put 2 windrows together, because lentils are pretty thin, so it'll pick up a bigger windrow and just run through the combine better. I open the combine up and turn the air down about halfway for the weight, and that seems not to damage them there.
Crucial to Daryl's operation in Great Falls is bin storage. He uses his bins to fully dry his crop and takes great pains to minimize damage during the process.
When you cut it in the field, you're cutting it wet so you don't lose it in the field. So it is going wet into the bin, and you want it. You want dryers in the bin. You want good aeration, preferably a cone bin on the bottom to get them out without the auger to disturb them. The moisture is a big watch point on it. It means getting your full dollar value for the crop or a discount. Have the bin ready, have the dryer set up in it. It is very important to have the dryers there and ready to go. You don't have time to set them up when you should be cutting. And then I've invested in a belt conveyor so that you eliminate another auger from damaging them. And the cone hoppers on the bins would be a big advantage for me. And loading back out into the truck with a belt conveyor again would all those steps save damage to the lentil.
So there you have it. Whether conventional or organic, it's the little tips and tricks you learn through the years that help you minimize damage. However, you have to rely on luck a little as well.
But as far as farming with organic, it is it's a challenge and it's fun. If you do it the first year, you ever grew lentils, you do it right, you're pretty lucky, and it'll probably be the last time, but you're learning something every year.
So indeed, every process has its own challenges and opportunities. So in harvesting organic crops, just be aware that there's no options for desiccation, that swathing is really our only option. And weeds that can occur in that crop, kochia, lamb's quarter, can really affect the quality. Also, bin preparation, making sure that you're set up and ready to go. If that crop comes in a little bit moist, make sure that bins are ready to go so you can have aeration. So now we're going to break over into the topic of crop quality after the pulses have been harvested, and what happens if we have a little bit of an issue and we need to make an insurance claim. So that sample taken for an insurance claim must be done by an agent. As a producer, you're used to taking bin samples and taking them into your grain inspection agency or perhaps to your elevator. But indeed, in that unique case of making an insurance claim, it's up to your agent to get that sample. So that sample is submitted, and we're going to be talking about how you get your grade, how that is determined using, and we're going to have images of the damages and defects, and then we'll go through reading the certificate.
My name is Greg Neal. I'm a senior board member for the Board of Appeals and Review in Kansas City, Missouri. All right, so we're going to be going through the process of grading smooth dry peas. Okay, so this is a procedure for breaking down a sample of smooth green dried peas. The first step to obtaining the sample was sampling, following a specific sampling pattern in strategic locations. We obtained this sample for inspection. When the grain comes to us, our first step is going to be cutting that down into a manageable portion. So what we're going to use is called a Borner divider. Now what the Borner divider does is it's an unbiased 50-50 split of the grain or commodity that we are looking for. So here we're going to take the peas, we're going to pour them into our Borner divider, and we're going to cut them down. When you're grading peas, you want between 1,000 and 1,050 grams. We will then take that, we'll cut it down and use 650 grams for moisture. If it's a processed lot, we will cut out 250. We will sieve that for small size and a specialty grain. If it is a thresher run, we will sieve the entire sample in thirds to remove the dockage and foreign material. After those two procedures are done, it is then ready and prepped for inspection. Of that 1,050 gram sample we had, we took out 250 and shook it. Now we're going to take the remainder of that sample, approximately about 650 grams, in order to fill that whole cell. Anything additional will be scraped off. So we have a specific channel for smooth peas in there. We'll push the button, it'll drop it, and it'll take out the remainder and analyze, like I said, approximately 650 grams. What we're trying to do is we're applying a numerical grade to that sample. So there's different levels of tolerances on what you can have, whether it be a damage, whether it be a foreign material, whether it be split peas, or whether it be peas that just have a crack on them, which is called a cracked seed coat, and you can see the meat of the cotyledon of the pea. So all of those are different defects that will be scored against the sample. Whenever we're determining damage, we have a whole list of different VRIs, as they're called, visual reference images. Okay, and what they are is they're a basic line that we developed here at the Board of Appeals and Review for what constitutes a damage and what is not a damage. Basically, the first thing that we do is we go through the sample and we'll find the defects. So the first defect we're looking at here is going to be bleach damage. And determining bleach, we'll actually find the kernel to challenge and we'll actually expose a certain amount of that. In order to be bleach damage, you have to have 1/8 of the kernel a solid yellow without any green bleeding in. Okay, so then also when we're looking for that, we're also going to be looking for damaged pieces of peas. So as you can see here, it's real dark, it's got a mold developed to it. That will also be picked out. Now, as you'll see here, there's different types of damages. You have chalk damage, which is what this is. Usually chalk is caused by two different things. It can be caused by hail, or it can be caused by a lygus bug. So what happens there is a lygus bug will actually sting the pea and will penetrate the kernel and create a white spot. So before we can call it damage, we actually have to remove the seed coat very carefully to expose that. Now what we want is we want a chalky white spot, white as paper. Okay, so those would both be damage. This one has had the seed coat taken off. It's got a real ugly, nasty white mold on there. It's also on the split side of the pea. You can see this one is a whole pea. The entire thing has got a coverage of mold on it. Those would both be scored in them as defects. This one here is not quite as bad as those, but you can see the mold lying outside the kernel, right along the edge, all across there. Another thing that we're always looking for in these samples is cracked seed coats. So as you can see here, this pea, the seed coat is cracked open where you can see the meat or the cotyledon of the pea itself. That is also scored against them as a defect. So the damage we're looking at now is shriveled smooth. So in order for us to call these a defect as shriveled, they have to meet multiple criteria. One, they have to be as misshapen and as wrinkled as these ones are, and they also have to have the discoloring that you can see here. It has a real caramel look to them. It's real dark and ununiform, so that there would be a shriveled pea. Here we have sprout damage. As you can see, it's pretty self-explanatory. The sprout of the pea is actually coming out, breaking through the seed coat, creating a long piece sticking out of the end. It is okay for a pea to have a certain degree of dirt or grime on the pea. Again, we have a VRI basically spelling out how much coverage is needed to exceed that and be called a defect. These are all examples of peas that have exceeded the amount of dirt and grime. Damage by heat is caused from usually internal respiration happening inside the bin due to storage conditions. Same thing, we have a visual reference image. If it's as dark as the VRI picture or darker, we are then going to take that for damage by heat. Weather damage is peas and pieces of peas that have a surface area that is discolored to the minimum intensity shown on the VRI. Okay, weevil damage is obviously caused by a pea weevil in the field or in the bin. So as you can see here, they leave a real nice round hole and they actually tunnel into the kernel, eating the interior meat out of it. These will be scored separately from your damaged kernels total, as there's a tighter tolerance for this specific damage. And like I say, there's different tolerances for what is allowed for a US number 1, a US number 2, US number 3, etc. And then there's also certain criteria that make it go sample grade, which is basically inferior for use. You know, a lot of things that may go sample grade may be stones, or if you have foreign substances that you're not sure of in there. There could be a count if you have animal excretia. Things like that are what make go sample grade. The most common one you see is going to be odor. You know, we're going to go in depth a little bit on odor. So odor basically has 3 major odors, and it can be broken down into many categories from there. But you have a musty, you have a sour, and you have a COFO. So COFO is a commercially objectionable foreign odor, and what that means is, you know, it's commercially objectionable foreign odor. It could be anything from gasoline, diesel fuels. We know all the combines, you know, run on diesel fuel, so that does happen. It could be something like a fumigant that was applied to the grain to protect it from bugs. It could be an insecticide. It could be anything that is unnatural to the natural odor of grain. Okay, so now that we have examined our sample for all the defects, foreign materials, splits, etc., I'm going to show you how we translate that over to our work record, and then how that translates into an official grade. So this is where all of our separate. So our sample began at 258. So these are the splits that I pulled out of the sample. So I'm going to take those, weigh them up, and I'll do this for each pen here. So I have 0.22 divided by my 258 percentage. I get a 0.08, and we go to the nearest tenth. So on my work record, for splits, I would put 0.1%. Then I would take that, put it in my pan, go on to the next one. So here we have damage. We're going to do the same thing. Now we're going to do a grade determination. To start off with weevil damage. So you have different tolerances for weevil damage. To be a US number 1, it has a tolerance of 0.3. 0.8 for number 2, 1.5 for number 3. So as you can see here, we have 1/10. So we still constitute a number 1. So our next step is we will go to damage. You can see damaged peas, you have a tolerance of 1% for a number 1. If you get 1.1%, it will then bump it to a number 2. The tolerance for a number 2 is 1.5. So if you exceed 1.5, you then become a number 3. And anything over 2% damage kernels total in 250 gram portion is sample grade.
So I just wanted to reiterate some of the points that Greg mentioned in that video about the decisions that you make at harvest and the care and effort that you take in setting up your combine and going through the process, how that affects your grade. So we looked at these grading factors, weevil damage, heat damage, and on down the line. So, for example, heat damage, you're making decisions there on how moist or what the moisture content of the pulses are when you store it in the bin. So that factor is affected by your decisions. Same way with damage. Dirt and grime is a type of damage. If you are very careful and if you have lodged areas in your field that you may think has some damaged peas in it, harvest that separately, keep that in a separate bin. Other classes, decisions that you make from moving from one field to another, yellow peas versus green peas, different classes of lentils, those are decisions that you're going to make that will affect your grade. Bleach peas, split peas, on down the line, and especially cracked seed coats. Now we're talking a lot about peas in this example, but these comments can be applied to all the different commodities, peas, lentils, chickpeas. And also some of the sample grade factors. Moisture is a grading factor. If you're in excess of, say, 15%, then that sample will be sample grade. And odors. Greg mentioned musty, sour, and commercially objectionable foreign odors. So musty is that earthy kind of basement smell that like a potato has sometimes. So if you're running perfect crop and dumping it into a contaminated bin, and all of a sudden you have a musty odor and your sample is going to be sample grade. And sour, sometimes what happens is you'll have an auger that has some old wheat in it that's really nasty. Just a little bit of that nasty, moldy, sour, fermented wheat can contaminate your entire bin of peas, lentils, or chickpeas. So now the last issue that we'd like to talk about is MRLs. And this is a critical component of our industry, both working on your farm in relationship to your processor and in our market, both domestically and internationally. So we'll hear more in detail about this from Todd Schultz.
Well, good morning. I'm Todd Schultz, the Vice President for Research and Membership Services, and I'm here to talk a little bit about MRLs, should you care, or harvest quality from another perspective. So why should we consider MRLs at harvest? You know, when you dream about what you're producing, maybe you're not thinking about a baseball team coming out of your pulse field, but you're certainly thinking about a nice crop of peas, a beautiful crop of lentils, or maybe even a great crop of chickpeas. But what do you actually get? You probably get virus and disease vectors, maybe insects, some disease pests, maybe even weeds. And so what is your solution? A possible solution is to spray. And once you spray and put crop protectants on the crop, you wind up with maximum residues or residues. And so you have to deal with MRLs as an element of harvest quality. So today what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of background on MRLs, like a 101 course. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we establish MRLs and should you even worry about it and what you can do about it. So first of all, a definition. A maximum residue limit, or MRL. In the United States, we call them tolerances, and it's established by a national or international authority. So there's several of those across the world, the EU, Canada, for instance, Australia. And an MRL is established by those authorities and it's measured in parts per million. Now a part per million, I thought it would be useful to see what that might mean in a scale. And so here's some examples of what 1 part per million is. It's really like 1 minute in 2,000 years. So that would be 1 minute in 1,000,000 minutes. 1 penny in $10,000. So basically what I'm trying to say is a part per million is a very small amount. So then these regulatory authorities like the EPA meet and they discuss or develop the effects on the environment of the residue. They evaluate the effects it might have on human health. And then through residue studies using GLP, GAP, and GAD, they develop how much residue would be in the system. With those bits of information, they establish what's called a risk cup, which isn't my first cup of coffee in the morning. It's really about how much each use of a pesticide on each crop impacts the environment. And by adding the risk cup from each pesticide, they come up with the total cumulative risk cup and establish an MRL based on that. So it's a relatively complicated process, but why do they establish it? Because we need some sort of measurement of the impacts to human health and the environment from MRLs. And it's also to facilitate trade. The real purpose is to make sure that if we're trading our commodity across international borders, one way or the other, that it's safe. So an MRL is set to facilitate trade. That means it's really safe. If we break or if we violate the MRL, the health risk is minimal. What it means is back in the system someplace, somebody didn't use the good agricultural practice, or there was some violation, maybe drift, that happened in the system. So it's just kind of a safety valve to look back on the system and see what happened and what we should do about it. But what we really need to know as growers is that without care, it'll impact our trade. For instance, in Japan, if the MRL is detected, if it's violated, then Japan authorizes their regulatory agency to inspect every instance of that crop coming from our country. So for instance, if a load of peas was found with 2,4-D on it, then every shipment of peas coming into Japan could be inspected. It would add cost and risk to that export market. So we need to take care. There's many reasons for that. Things have changed and consumers are considerably concerned about what's on their food. So chemicals and pesticides are of high interest to the consumer. And in addition, measurement devices, which used to be large and expensive, have reduced in size. They're much cheaper, so they're available to countries across the world, and they're much more sensitive, so they can measure 1 part per billion. And we're talking about 1 part per million. So anyway, should we worry about that? You know, we've seen that the environment has changed, and so here's a couple of examples that I think you might use as in your harvest operations as a pre-harvest aid. For instance, glyphosate or Roundup, field peas. Let's just look over here at China, one of our best markets for peas, and we have 8 parts per million, and China doesn't have an MRL established. So should we worry? Well, they do default to Codex, but that still means that there's a possibility for a problem. If you look at saflufenicil or Sharpen, another product you might add to the Roundup to make it more effective, look at lentils in Europe. One of our better markets is 0.03 and our MRL is 0.3. So there's a potential problem with MRLs in our system. So what should we do? Oh my God, what should we do? So here's 3 or 4 things you might be able to do as a grower. First of all, follow the label. Don't exceed it, just follow the label. Pay attention to the timing. For instance, Roundup has a 14-day pre-harvest interval. Pay attention to that. Don't harvest earlier, because that'll increase your chances of having a residue on your crop. And then finally, consult with your exporter and your processor, because they know which market they're focusing on, and they know whether our MRLs are harmonized or not. And then for sure, in red, and everybody tells you this, don't use off-label uses. It doesn't matter that you need that. If it's off-label, there's no MRL, and you're putting the whole system at risk. Think about where your crop goes if it winds up in the same bin as your neighbors and you're using it off-label, you've contaminated the entire bin and contaminated even your neighbor's crop. So the reason this is important is MRLs are actually the next trade barrier, perhaps. The WTO countries have reduced tariffs, so our tariffs are becoming balanced. MRLs are still allowed because they are related to health, and you can use health as a restriction on your crop. So it's a potential tariff barrier and non-tariff barrier. And then the landscape of sales is more complicated because China, Korea, Japan all have their own national authorities, and they have the potential to have MRLs that are different than the United States or different than Codex. So that complicates it and makes it much more expensive. So in the end, what should you do about MRLs as you're preparing for harvest? So follow the label and know your processor, and then be careful out there. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and wish you good luck in your harvest. MRLs are very important, and just follow the label and know your processor. Thank you.
So thanks very much. I'd like to thank all of our presenters, Tim McGreevy, CEO of the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council and the APA, Chief Irwin, Whitman County Volunteer Fire Department, Kurt Bronert and Ken Fuchs of ProGene and on the research committee, Dr. Drew Lyons, our endowed chair from WSU, speaking about desiccation, Farmer Daryl Lasilla from near Great Falls, Montana, a great producer of organic pulse crops, Greg Neal, FGIS bar member, and Todd Schultz, the Vice President of Research and Member Services. So that concludes our Module 3 on PulsED, Harvest Concerns. Thank you very much. Have a safe and bountiful harvest.
In the community of Farmington, Washington, there isn't much free time during harvest season. The sidewalks are almost empty, and every third vehicle rolling on these streets has some agricultural purpose. For pulse grower Jim Thompson, this is the reveal, the time when he pulls away the dusty tarp to see what treasure lies beneath. So, just a few miles beyond this sleepy town where two gravel county roads meet, Jim is slowly reaping his reward, patiently driving his combine through acres of dry peas this week, perhaps lentils the next, and chickpeas in the fall, hoping the weather holds and the prices reflect the hard work he and other pulse farmers have put into their fields. This is Pulse Harvest, and Jim is one of the many USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council members who take pride in raising the best quality pulses in the world.